There we go. And good afternoon or good day, whatever time you are watching this after it's recorded. My name is Evan Weiner, and I want to thank you for spending some time with me, about 56 minutes, talking about Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball, whose birthday is August 6th. She would have been 110 years old, and she was the most powerful woman in Hollywood, not because she was a great actress, or she had a great show or a great run at a show, which was #1 for a while. But she was the most powerful businesswoman in Hollywood. In fact, she was one of the most powerful business women in the United States. And she did it all before Betty Friedan organized the National Organization of Women, before women started talking about breaking the glass ceiling. She did it before Gloria Steinem was a Playboy bunny and exposed the life of the Playboy bunny in 1963, before Bella Abzug, and she hits the big time. It took her a long time to hit the big time in 1951. Lucy should never have been the most powerful woman in Hollywood. In fact, the fact that she survived is an amazing story in itself, because she was told by everybody, you have no talent. And for somebody who had no talent, she went a long, long way. She was born in Jamestown, New York, the southwest corner of New York, on August 6, 1911, which would be make her 110 years old on Friday. Her father was a telephone lineman who died installing lines. It was a very difficult job back then. Telephones had just really started to proliferate in the United States. And his death left Lucy and a brother and a mother, Desiree, along with Desiree's father, Fred, and Desiree's mother, Flora Bell Hunt. Fred Hunt almost scuttled Lucy's career when Lucy was about 42 years old in 1953 because of something that happened in 1936. She's the unlikely Hollywood mogul. She leaves Jamestown, 1928, and she's headed to Broadway. She's going to acting school, and she's going to trip the light fantastic, the roar of the grease paint, all that other stuff. She's going to be this major, major, major star. She goes to acting school. Betty Davis's classmate in acting school in 1928. And they tell Lucy, hey, kid, you just don't have it. Why don't you go home? Go back to Jamestown, because you ain't going to make it in this town. It took Lucy approximately 20 years before she, quote unquote, made it. And she would come up with the idea of Desilu, Desi Arnaz, Lucille Ball, the company, about 2 decades after being rejected. And one of the things that she learned, rejection after rejection after rejection, was how to survive. And not only survive, but eventually thrive. Desilu, she runs Desilu without Desi. And she has this hit show called Star Trek that nobody wanted except for 2 people. Gene Roddenberry, the creator, and Lucille Ball. Desilu Production in association with Norway Corporation. She rebuilt Desilu Studios in the 1960s, was Hollywood's most powerful businesswoman. In 1962, she buys out her ex-husband, although her friend, Desi Arnaz, to have complete control of the company. She was the first woman to own a major studio. 3 of the shows that she greenlighted, 2 of them as the head of Desilu, Mission Impossible and Star Trek, and 1 as the co-head of Desilu, the Untouchables, were successful movie franchises, and Star Trek has taken on many iterations over the years. And there's only one person to thank for that, and that's Lucy. But she gets to New York. She's told you don't have it. And she wants to stay in New York. And she wants to make it in showbiz. And she gets some jobs as a model. There she is as a model for Chesterfield cigarettes and other things. But she's not making any money. She's the boyfriend of a gangster. To make some money on the side to support herself, she sells herself. She's into prostitution. to make some money to survive in New York. But ultimately, she doesn't survive in New York. She heads out to Hollywood in 1933. She's 22 years old at the time, and she becomes a Goldwyn girl. Shmuel Goldfish, Samuel Goldwyn. And you would think it's Goldwyn girl. You have a shot at it, but there were a lot of Goldwyn girls. They were a dime a dozen. But she does get into a movie called Roman Scandals. At least she's in this movie, starring Eddie Cantor. Eddie Cantor at this time is at the height of his popularity. Back in 1933, he's got the song Making Whoopee. He's well known, and eventually he would, like all the other stars of the 20s and 30s, become a radio star. In an effort to survive in Hollywood, Lucille becomes a stunt girl. And this is kind of amazing considering she supposedly had rheumatoid arthritis, and my wife has it. So I know the disabilitating factors of rheumatoid arthritis. She becomes a stunt girl. And I knew a stunt girl. Her name was Verita Thompson, and she was Humphrey Bogart's mistress. And I knew her, she was in her 80s. She was the queen of New Orleans, the queen of Bourbon Street. She had owned a bar in New Orleans called Bogey's, which was named after Humphrey Bogart, who she was his mistress. She sold the bar to Jennifer Flowers, and we know about Jennifer Flowers and Bill Clinton. But anyway, I was talking to Verita one day, and she told me that she was a stunt woman. She had won the Miss Arizona Beauty pageant. She was in the Miss America pageant, and she goes to Hollywood. She was a good-looking woman, and she figured she's going to hit the big time in Hollywood. She doesn't. She becomes a stunt girl, and I said, well, what'd you do as a stunt girl? She said, jump from horse to horse, hoping I don't fall off. If I fall off, I may break a bone. If I break a bone, I can't work. I'd fall out of buildings and do all kind of other things because the star couldn't do it. The star might get hurt. And so I did all that. So Lucille Ball was doing that a couple of years before Verita started. Verita was in the pageant in 1937. So she went out to Hollywood in 1938. So Lucille Ball preceded her by about 5 years. But that's what a stunt girl did. And you did it to survive. Verita ultimately never made it as an actress, and she became a hairstylist in Hollywood and then opened some restaurants as well. Buster Keaton, the star of 1920 silent movies, did see Lucy in action somewhere along the way. And he took a liking to her. And he saw some promise in Lucy and thought she could be in comedies, and helped hone her timing and the ability for her to use props for laughs. He even demonstrated how to perform physical comedy without getting hurt. And then he calls Harry Cohn, who's running the Columbia Picture Studios. And he says, Harry, I got a girl for you. Her name is Lucy. I think she has it. I think you should use her. And they do. In the Three Stooges short, one of those two reelers, of which about 16, 18 minutes of Three Stooges, and there she is. Curly, Lucy, Moe, and Larry. She is there with the Three Stooges, and this is her introduction into comedy. Eye pokes, slaps, hair pulls, yuck, 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 and everything else that the Three Stooges did, pies in the face, and she's learning from the masters, except these guys were totally underpaid by Cohn over at Columbia Pictures. Lucy does get a contract with Columbia, and she's cast into this short film with the Three Stooges called Three Little Pigskins, first venture into comedy. She would credit the Stooges with introducing her to slapstick and physical comedy, which would become her stock in trade years later. But Harry Cohn didn't think very much of Lucy, didn't think she had any talent, dropped her. She befriends Ginger Rogers' mother, who is kind of a den mother to all these young actresses. And by the time Lucy is 26, she's on the RKO lot, RKO studio lot. And she's cast in a movie called Stage Door. I was at a talk last week. Yeah, last week. And this woman was so excited. Stage Door, Stage Door, Stage Door. She says, I watched Stage Door. I said, you like the movie? She said, it was great. I loved the movie. Loved the movie. Stage door, Gregory LaCava cast the brown-haired Lucille Ball to play Ginger Rogers' dance partner in Stage Door. Katharine Hepburn was in the movie, along with Ann Miller and Eve Arden. And the movie was RKO's big effort of the year. Hit at the box office. But for Lucy, he does absolutely nothing, and she's out the door at RKO. So she lands at MGM. She meets another comedy team, Julius Marks, Leonard Marks, and Adolph. Changed my name to Arthur Marks, and there she is in between Groucho and Chico, and she's in the movie Room Service. Not one of my favorite Marx Brothers movies. It's not up there with Duck Soup. It's not up there with Horse Feathers or Night at the Opera or Day at the Races. However, Lucy does befriend Harpo, and Harpo would be on the I Love Lucy show in the mid-1950s, recreating the mirror scene that was in Duck Soup, Harpo and Lucy. Tell him Groucho sent you. So she's at MGM with the Marx Brothers in Room Service. She struggles for many, many, many years in Hollywood, particularly during the early years of her career, 33 to say 1940. She appears in anything that comes her way, drama films, romantic comedies, The Three Stooges in the 30s and 40s. And we get this nickname, which wasn't exactly a great and flattering nickname, but it was a nickname nonetheless, called Queen of the B Pictures. The B Pictures, that was the afterthought on the double feature, The B Pictures. 1940 is a big year for the 29-year-old Lucille Ball and 23-year-old Desi Arnaz. It is in 1940 that Lucy starts getting a little notice. She's no longer a starlet. She's an older woman in Hollywood, 29 years old. There are people far younger than her looking to get ahead. But she gets some notice in a movie called Dance Girl Dance, playing the role of Bubbles. And that year, she's also in a movie called Too Many Girls alongside of Desi Arnaz. Kind of ironic that she's in that movie, considering that her marriage to Desi Arnaz was plagued by too many girls. Desi Arnaz is the most unlikely of mates for Lucille Ball. He comes from a very rich family in Cuba, until they weren't. See, in 1933, the eventual dictator, Batista, knocks off the country and becomes the de facto leader of the country. And Desi Arnaz, who comes from a rich family and his father is a politician, Desi Arnaz and his family have to flee Cuba, and they end up in Miami Beach, penniless, and they have to start all over again. Desi has some musical ability, and he thinks he could be an actor, and he heads out to Hollywood when he's old enough. He's born in 1917, so he's 23 when he gets out to Hollywood. So Desi and Lucy fall in love, and they elope in November 1940. She's 29, he's 23. And the newlyweds don't really see each other very much, because Lucy is in every B picture going and takes every radio show she can. And Desi, even though he kind of washes out the movies, he's got that musical career and he's always on tour. So the newlyweds seldom saw one another, and Lucy files for divorce from Desi in 1944 due to rumors of drinking and infidelity, but they reconciled. And she is the queen of the B movies. Here she is in The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert. Eddie Albert and Lucy would share something in the 1950s that could derail their careers. They're both on the red channels list, communist sympathizers, which happened somewhere in the 1930s and 40s for both Lucy and Eddie Albert, and scores and scores and scores of other actors, people like Leonard Bernstein, writers, in the entertainment field. A whole bunch of people in the entertainment field were smeared. She's a player. She's a real player in Hollywood. Not making much money, but she's a player. In the 1940s, she starred in all these comedies, including Her Husband's Affairs. Again, kind of ironic considering her life with Desi. Miss Grant Takes Richmond with William Holden. William Holden was the boyfriend of my friend, Verita Thompson. She had stories about him, Jimmy Cagney, all these others. But anyway, William Holden was in that movie. The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert and two Bob Hope movies, Sorrowful Jones and Fancy Pants. So here's the question, and with MTV celebrating its 40th anniversary on August 1st, might as well ask the question, did television kill the radio star? And was Lucy a radio star? Well, the truth of the matter is in radio, there were actors and actresses who came and went. The real stars were people like Mel Blanc, who did many, many voices, or the real stars, sound effects guy. All that stuff. They were the stars. They just read off the script. So Lucy had been kicking around radio. And she was a known commodity. And somebody was putting together a show called My Favorite Husband. And My Favorite Husband was never supposed to be on radio, except July 5th, 1948, CBS had a series called Or Miss Brooks that was coming out. It was supposed to be on, but they couldn't get on to air, and CBS had the show in the can called My Favorite Husband. So they decided to put it on. My Favorite Husband, there's Lucy, and there's Richard Denning, the stars of the show. Lucy with her Technicolor red hair. it's really out there red hair. Anyway, My Favorite Husband featured Lucille Ball opposite Richard Denning. The show was written by Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. Those writers would be integral to Lucy's radio success. And they would all move on to a relatively new medium called television. My Favorite Husband, the radio show that became I Love Lucy. My Favorite Husband, two people live together and like it. My Favorite Husband was the first radio series to star motion picture musical comedy performer Lucille Ball. She wasn't a star. She was a musical comedy performer. And her co-star was Richard Denning. Ball and Denning were Liz and George Cooper. Happy couple who would get themselves into all kinds of domestic scraps. Forerunner of I Love Lucy. And they had best friends. They weren't named the Mertzes, they were named the Atterberries. Gail Gordon and Iris, who was, Gail Gordon played Rudolph, and Iris was played by B. Benedette Red. And they would become the Mertzes. There was music by Wilbur Hatch in the studio, and Wilbur Hatch would be in the studio when they did I Love Lucy, conducting the Desi Arnaz Orchestra. The series would start in 1948, end in 1951. Had to go on TV. CBS approached Lucille Ball in 1950 about doing a weekly program on television. And of course, she jumped at the opportunity. Television was rather young at that point. The networks had started in 1946. Dumont, NBC, and CBS. Television had been kicking around since 1928, but it wasn't real until 1946 that it really rounded into something resembling what we see today. And Lucille Ball, okay, she's got a successful radio show, but she's never been a success in the movies. She never had even an opportunity on Broadway. Best she could do was as a cigarette model, but she feels that she has some negotiation leverage, and she thinks that, hey, she could actually go in there and have some leverage and have CBS listen to her. And she does. It's called in the business chutzpah or nerve. Her first requirement for any show almost killed the idea of what would become the I Love Lucy show. See, her first requirement was that her real husband, Desi Arnaz, who was Cuban, would play her husband on television, and she had another thought in mind. It's going to be 39 weeks. He's got to be with me. He's off the road. Doesn't have to booze it up. Doesn't have to worry about finding women, and it could save my marriage. But CBS said, not so fast. Not so fast. Nah. So the Jell-O, the potential sponsor of the TV show, who was the sponsor of the radio show. Here's the problem. Lucy has to face the American public, and CBS and Jello think, American public's not going to accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York. He's a Cuban exile. CBS and Jello both insisted that the radio co-star Richard Denning continue as the co-star. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Phil Morris would eventually replace Jello, and Lucy wants to save her marriage, so that's why they're working together. And they are married. They've been married since 1940, and they are legally married in most of the United States. They are legally married in most of the United States. CBS was told by Lucy, yeah, both of us, or you don't get either one of us. CBS would eventually concede, even though the networks had doubts since Desi was Cuban, had a strong Cuban accent. Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple, which in 1950 carried lots and lots of risks for a television network and a television show. You got to go back 74 years. Rutherford v. Hayes, Samuel Tilden, presidential election of 1876, which was disputed, and the Democrats and the Republicans would come to an agreement allowing Hayes to become president. Oh, and they're still married 74 years later. Interracial marriage was illegal in parts of the United States. America's civil rights movement was stalled since 1875. Desegregation in the South ends with the Hayes-Tilden presidential race in 1876. Hayes, the Republican, would become president after the Democrats cut a deal with the Republicans. Democrats said, get the federal troops out of South Carolina, get the federal troops out of Louisiana, give us states' rights. We'll give you the Oval Office. And that's what happened. They cooked up a deal. Democrats thought that states' rights and getting the troops out of the South was more important than the president of the United States. Oh, interracial marriage by that point, illegal in more than a dozen states, the former Confederacy. Lucy and Desi decide that they are going to tackle this problem head on. After all, Lucy is a survivor. And how are they going to do this head on? Well, it's pretty simple. In the summer of 1950, they go on tour. And they go from theater to theater before live audiences, and they're proving to CBS and a potential sponsor that Desi, her husband, Desi, her real-life husband, would be believable as her on-screen husband. In early 1951, after CBS said, hey, you two can work together, we watched it, we saw it, it's great. They produced a film pilot for the series, I Love Lucy, and they paid for it, $5,000 out of their own money, which was great for CBS. They didn't have to invest any money in the show, which meant that if the show never went on, they weren't going to lose any money. All the money, it was on Lucy and Desi, the money to raise the money and get the show on. Oh, there are other things that Lucy wants. Carl Freund, he's gonna shoot the show. CBS said, well, wait a minute. If he's going to shoot the show, he's got to be in New York. Oh, no. We're going to do it in Los Angeles. No, you can't. All of our shows come out of New York and Chicago, primetime shows. You can't do that because we shoot it live and we take a camera and shoot it off the TV and distribute it to other stations that aren't hooked in by microwave or wiring or whatever. And those were New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Boston. We expect first run shows in New York. Hey, not a problem. We're gonna have 35 millimeter film. We're gonna shoot it simultaneously using multiple cameras before a live audience. So everybody's going to see the same show. Who's paying for it? We are. There were other shows that were shot that way, like Groucho, You Bet Your Life, there with Fenneman. Your Showtime, The Stu Irwin Show, and The Life of Riley. Fairbanks had developed the process and started using multiple camera film production for television in 1950. You Bet Your Life used a multiple camera film setup before a live studio audience the year before Lucy started. Lucy also knew talent. She knew talent. And she thought Desi would be the perfect foil for her. He had an expressive face, good comedic timing, right amount of fluster in that face as the husband Ricky. He mispronounced or Latinized words. That adds to the comedy. Lucy, Swain. Within 4 months of its debut, the I Love Lucy show was #1 in New York, and the national audience soon followed. It's a smash hit. It's a smash hit. There is Lucy. There is Ethel. There is Fred. There is Ricky. Hey, congratulate us. We're a big hit. The show was layered. There was the relationship between Desi and Lucy, but more importantly, there was a relationship between the two friends, Lucille Ball and Vivian Vance. So it was multi-layered, which was unusual for a show at that time. CBS has a smash hit. Hey, it looks great. It looks great. Lucy and Desi, they're paying for the increase in production costs because it's on film. We at CBS, we don't own it. They have it. They can do what they want with it. We're not on the hook except paying for some salaries. And that would turn out to be a brilliant business move by Lucy and Desi, keeping the show. Because in 1951, nobody thought anybody would watch a rerun. Nobody's going to watch a rerun. Who wants to watch a show a second time? The deal? Desi and Lucy received ownership rights to I Love Lucy in exchange for a $1,000 pay cut. All is well going into the second season. No, not all is well going into the second season because Lucy is pregnant. And that could potentially be a show killer. Lucy and Desi almost ended I Love Lucy after they found out she was going to have a second baby. This is 1952 America, and it was considered too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV. Television, like the movies, had censorship. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant. She was expecting in a family way. Couldn't use the word pregnant. But Jess Oppenheimer, who was looking adoringly at Lucy, who was looking adoringly at Jess Oppenheimer with Desi looking kind of quizzical, it's the goodbye breakup party for the year. So long till August, Desi and Lucy. So it's the breakup party. They're not going to see each other for a couple of months. And Oppenheimer comes up with an idea. He was the show's runner. He was the producer and head writer. And he said, let's write Lucy's pregnancy into the show. Okay, this is a problem. Because in 1952 America, or 1942 America, although it wouldn't apply to TV in 1942, there was never a pregnant woman who appeared, or knowingly pregnant or visibly pregnant woman who appeared on any stage, on Broadway, television, or in the movies. So this is a big risk for all concerned. Lucy Desi and Jess Oppenheimer from the creative end, CBS and the show sponsor, Philip Morris. What are we going to do? Oppenheimer does talk to CBS, as does Desi. And the storyline works because CBS is okay. Lucy could be pregnant and you can show her once in a while during the pregnancy. But don't make a habit of this. Some of the scripts did address the topic. But CBS said, tone it down a lot. Tone it down an awful lot because you don't want to cause too much of a stir because pregnant woman, pregnant woman. But Lucy and Desi won. They won. In the early fall, according to Lucy, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did 7 shows concerning my pregnancy. These films are screened by a priest, minister, and a rabbi for any possible violation of good taste. My daughter-in-law is pregnant. She's in her 7th month. And I never thought that her being pregnant or giving me my first grandkid was any possible violation of good taste. Apparently it was in 1952 America on TV. It was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi watch your show. A three-man religious committee half doth protested. As they walked in, the priest, minister, and rabbi, they walk into a room and watch a show. I think half doth protested is biblical. Lucy says that they said to her, "What's wrong with being pregnant?" They were hardly in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. The pregnancy goes on. By the way, Lucy wore pants or slacks during the show between 1951 and 57. She was the first woman on TV to wear pants. In 1960, on the Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary Tyler Moore tried to wear capri pants, and CBS got all flustered about her wearing pants. And it was her saying, well, I don't see people in my, who I hang out with all dressed up vacuuming, which she had to do on the show. I want to be comfortable vacuuming. I think that's the way to go. And CBS told Carl Weiner, who's writing the show, no more. Carl put it in. And after about 4 or 5 episodes, nobody noticed that Mary Tyler Moore was wearing pants. Oh, CBS gave the excuse about Mary Tyler Moore. She looks so good that some of the audience will say, I don't look as good as her, and that would not be a good thing. By the way, that is what the set looked like. That is what the colors, or those were the colors that were used in the set. During the second season, 52-53, when Lucy was pregnant, she couldn't do the entire 39-episode production schedule, so she would miss a program here and there. Now, at that point in television, 1952-53, you did not show a program multiple times. You showed it once, and that was it. However, one thing that Desi and Lucy had going for them at that point was that television stations were coming online. In fact, in South Dakota, they didn't have their first television station until 1954, which would have meant 3 years into the I Love Lucy run before they saw it for the first time in South Dakota. Desi and the producer, Jess Oppenheimer, come up with an unusual idea. On the shelf, right there on the shelf behind me, 39 shows just sitting there with their 2-inch tapes or 2-inch film. Why don't we just give it to CBS and see if that works? If that works, it's not a problem. It worked. The ratings were winners. We created a new area for TV, syndication. So the Lucy Show creates rerun syndication in Los Angeles as the home for television production. Desilu went on to invent the concept of the rerun, and they used the profits from the I Love Lucy show syndication to fund the growth of their studio. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnett, neither having any business background, through their business decisions, were television's first millionaires. Oh, about the pregnancy and all that other stuff. The pregnancy. June 20th, Dwight Eisenhower sworn in as the most powerful man in the United States. There is Herbert Hoover, who is to the kind of left at maybe the 20 to noon position on the clock, to Warren's left, the Chief Justice of the United States, and Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon. I got to know Dick Nixon 1985 when I was covering the Major League Baseball umpires dispute. He was selected as the arbitrator. And I would see him every once in a while after that, and I would say, hello, Mr. President. Call me Dick. Call me Dick. Richard Nixon, who's there. Oh, just look at that face. Look at that face. The little Ricky versus Ike comparison. Remember, CBS was worried about Lucy being pregnant and how the American public would take it without being offended. Well, the show that little Ricky is born is January 19th, 1953, approximately 15 hours before Eisenhower is sworn in. 44 million Americans watch Lucy give birth on TV. Ike gets 15 less viewers for his inauguration, or 29 million. They survive yet another crisis. The pregnancy is no big deal. So, you figure another 4, 5, 6 years, right on top. They can continue. They're popular, right on top, full speed ahead. But no. New York Daily News, September 1953. Registered red in 36. Lucille Star denies she voted communist. And there is the smoking gun from 1936, Lucille Ball's voter registration. She was a member of the Communist Party. I intend to affiliate at the ensuing primary election with the Communist Party. Told you, she and Eddie Albert had the same problem. Eddie Albert was supposedly a communist sympathizer. She had the same problem as Leonard Bernstein and a whole bunch of others. So let's go back to 1953, America in 1953. About 6 years earlier, the Hollywood Reporter came out with an article saying that there were communists in Hollywood, 1947. And it snowballs from there to red channels, and there are all kinds of people who are outed as communists, people like Leonard Bernstein. Fighting Communism, this is the Red Channels tract, and Red Channels outed a whole bunch of communists. Hollywood Reporter started with Dalton Trumbo and Howard Koch and a whole bunch of others, and that kept festering and festering and festering, and then Red Channels came up with their thing. Fighting Communism, Americans don't patronize Reds. You can drive the Reds out of television, radio, and Hollywood. This track will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films made by Red producers, directors, writers, and stars are being used by Moscow in Asia, Africa, the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftily glorify Marxism. I'm not sure if it's Carl or Groucho, Chico, or Harpo, but Marxism nonetheless. UNESCO, one worldism via your TV set. They are being piped into your living room and are poisoning the minds of your children right under your very eyes. So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, and stars in studios, you will be aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you are helping Moscow and the internationalists destroy America. Lucy's World. The Red Scare, the blacklist, involved the practice of denying employment to entertainment industry professionals believed to be or have been communists or sympathizers. And that actually goes back before the Hollywood Reporter. It goes back to Walt Disney in 1941, saying that communists were involved in a writer's strike against the movies. That was Disney back in 1941. It wasn't just actors, but screenwriters, directors, musicians, and other American entertainment professionals. They are barred from work by the studios. Here are some people you might or might not have heard of. Pert Kelton, the original Alice Cramden on the Cavalcade of Stars on Dumont's Honeymooners sketches. That was 1951. She's abruptly dropped from her role because she was blacklisted, and she would be replaced by Audrey Meadows. Jackie Gleason was not happy with this, but the producers did what they had to do. Rather than acknowledge that she was blacklisted, the producers explained that her departure was based on alleged heart problems. Gleason took care of her later on when he was doing his show from Miami in the mid-1960s. The American Screen Magazine show was on CBS Saturday nights. And they brought back Honeymooner skits. Kelton was Alice Cramden's mother, or Ralph's mother-in-law. Hazel Scott, the first Afro-Caribbean host on television, first person of color host on television. She was on the Dumont Network, 1950. She had been a Juilliard graduate. You can go up on YouTube and watch her performances on the piano. She is a really good pianist. She was also a singer. She's okay as a singer, but as a pianist, she is absolutely spectacular. She also was an actress in the 1940s, and she's outed by Red Channels. And the show would come to an end. She's named in Red Channels. That's the pamphlet that I read from that listed supposed communist sympathizers and entertainment. In September 1950, she says, I'm going to testify before the House on Un-American Activities Committee, UAC, and I'm going to defend myself. Sponsors were not too eager to see Hazel continue. They dropped sponsorship of her show, and a week after, in September 1950, Dumont dropped the show. This is Phillip Loeb. Phillip Loeb was an actor. He was on the Goldbergs back in the day, 1949. In 1955, Phillip Loeb, the actor, checks himself into the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan under a false name. Takes a fatal dose of sleeping pills. Can't find work. He has a child with special needs. He can't support that child with special needs. He was accused of being a communist and can no longer find work. Zero Mostel wrote extensively about his friend Phillip Loeb. In fact, Zero Mostel and Woody Allen were in a movie called The Front, which was done in the mid-1970s, which somehow lacked life. You kind of figure, how could Woody Allen and Zero Mostel be in a comedy film that lacked life? But that did lack life. And some of the Mostel character was based on Phillip Loeb. In the movie, Zero Mostel's character commits suicide. In 1949, Phillip Loeb was the co-star of the first situation comedy, Gertrude Berg's The Goldbergs, which was about a Jewish couple assimilating into the United States, complete with George Washington, painting of George Washington in their living room. The networks told Gertrude Berg Phillip Loeb had to go. She resisted and resisted until she couldn't, but they slipped him some money as well, but the show eventually would be killed off. McCarthyism and blackballing. It was a big thing in the 1950s. So that's Lucy's world, and on September 4th, 1953, she has to give testimony, or would give voluntary testimony, to an investigator for the House on Un-American Activities, UAC. And she would tell the investigator, this is our grandfather, Fred Hunt. He wanted us to do it, and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way. As I recall, I didn't. The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, was a big fan of the I Love Lucy show. And he may have saved Lucy from being blacklisted, although that's never been clear. But she wasn't blacklisted. She swore to the House committee that she had never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for room in the garage to organize with friends. In her autobiography, Lucille Ball observed in herself a strong conservative. Puritan streak. I'm the most conservative member of my family. It was for her grandfather, a progressive and free thinker, that she registered as a communist. She told them her story, and UAC bought her story, or somebody bought her story, because the show would continue. And she gives a news conference about it, and she seems pretty confident that things are going to work out if you look at her. Whereas Desi has seen this before in Cuba. He was thrown out of Cuba with his family in 1933, he looks kind of worried. Now, if you've ever gone to a television show with a live audience, I'll give you an example. Johnny Carson had Ray Combs as his comedian, who warmed up the crowd during his routine, and also told the crowd what you can and can't do during a show. That was what he did. And so Desi had that job with the I Love Lucy show. And he's telling an audience before the filming of episode 68, called The Girls Go Into Business, doing the warm-up. And he talks about the allegations. And he says, the only thing red about Lucy is her hair. And even that's not legitimate. That was Lucy before she turned redhead in front of the CBS radio microphones back in the late 30s, early 40s. When Lucy signed with MGM in the early 1940s, the studio hairstylist, Sidney Gelleroth, changed her hair from brown to red for the movie. Barry Was a Lady in 1943. She got another nickname. Not exactly flattering, but it's another nickname. Technicolor testing, not A Natural Redhead. It was a tough gig, and you can see why they wanted to call the show as early as they did and get out. She caught colds, had crying spells, broke 2 fingers, sprained her ankle 3 times, pulled the tendon, sweated off 19 pounds, came down with a virus, went on hiatus, recovered at the beach, fainted on stage, fainted again on stage. The production company set up an oxygen tank for her in the wings, and she would faint again. And then 1956, Confidential magazine. Now, I'll never, as a journalist, understand the mentality behind the reporter doing work for a scandal rag or a gossip rag like Confidential magazine. Confidential magazine somehow got pictures of Desi with some prostitutes, and they decide to confront Lucy with it. We're going to do a story, and we're going to wreck your career. We're going to wreck Desi's career. Why would you want to do that? But I guess for money, a certain amount of money, some journalists will do anything. Anyway, they confront her with the pictures, and she says, I've seen worse than that. And that was the end of that. Confidential magazine also tried to ruin Rock Hudson's career by outing him as gay. The business of I Love Lucy. Like I said, by 1956, they have had it. And they decide we've got 181 episodes here. What are we going to do with it? We really don't have an arm to syndicate shows to TV, and CBS could do that. So they sell the show for $5 million, all 181 episodes. And that begins the rerun industry, really begins the rerun industry. With that money, Lucy and Desi would purchase the RKO studio lot, the same RKO studio lot that Lucy failed at in Hollywood to film other shows. Filmed in Hollywood by Desilu. Desilu's lot in Culver City would be the outdoor setting for several films and numerous television shows, along with the interior, including The Dick Van Dyke Show, Make Room for Daddy, Andy Griffith Show, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, Star Trek, That Girl, and many more. Oh, my favorite husband, Joan Caulfield and Field and Barry Nelson, would make it to TV 2 years after it was canceled. CBS put My Favorite Husband on television with Joan Caulfield and Barry Nelson as Liz and George Cooper. The television version runs 2.5 years, September 53 through December 55. The first 2 years produced at CBS Television City in Hollywood by the Farmers Market and the mall that is out there called The Grove, and I'm quite familiar with that entire area. My friends in LA take me to The Grove, and I don't have to pay for dinner, which is the greatest thing going. Anyway, it was done at what is now known as the Bob Barker Studio at Television City. CBS had the property up for sale until recently. And then they said, wait a minute, we're going to expand it because there are so many outfits like Netflix, which comes up a bit later in the talk, stay tuned, that they decided to keep it. So The Price is Right will continue from the Bob Barker Studio at Television City. The show switched to film for a third season at Desilu, owned by Lucy. By 57, they're done. They're toast. And they tell CBS, we're out of here. Desi doesn't want to do it anymore. Lucy doesn't want to do it anymore. And they turn down $80,000 per episode from CBS. Multiply it by 39, that's about $3 million, worth today over $30 million. And also for doing nothing, 13 repeats, 13 times 3, $420,000. So nearly $4 million they could have gotten for one more year. But Desilu strikes a deal with Ford. Ford's trying to push the Edsel and its other products at that time. By the way, the Edsel would become the Mercury Comet. The Edsel would become the Mercury Comet. They made some modifications on that. The Edsel is in the dustbin of history, except for the cars I occasionally see around that survive. Anyway, so they sell sponsorship to Ford for $2.5 million and $500,000 a show. Lucy and Desi, 5 specials. But for the most part, it's done. They still have the Ann Sothern Show on TV. And Desilu also has the Untouchables. Lucy is primarily responsible for moving most of American television primetime production from New York to Los Angeles. The game shows were still in New York. The news shows were in New York and Washington. Sullivan and Sullivan was still in New York, but most of the shows were in LA by 1957. Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, that's their new show, and 48 episodes between 58 and 1960, and 3 of the episodes would turn into other shows. The Twilight Zone, 1 episode, and 2 episodes of The Untouchables. Lucy makes her formal debut as the producer over at Desilu with a 1959 episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Rod Serling makes a pitch to Lucy and Desi, produce my special. And they say, sounds great. We'll produce the special. We'll put it on the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. It's called The Time Element. Stars William Bendix. CBS loves the show. Critics love the show. CBS and Serling decide to cut out the middleman, Desi and Lucy, the studios, and decide to work together for a show called The Twilight Zone. It's a science fiction fantasy anthology series that debuts with CBS fall of 1959. It would last till 1964. These are the Untouchables. Third from the left is Robert Stack. Desilu Playhouse, 2-part drama called The Untouchables. Paul Monash adopted the 1957 memoirs of the Treasury agent Elliot Ness, played by Robert Stack. CBS said no to the show. The Untouchables became a hit on ABC and ran for 4 seasons. The Untouchables was a hot property in more ways than one. There were a lot of groups that didn't particularly like the Untouchables, tried to censor it in some ways because of the amount of violence that was shown on that show. 1960, Lucy and Desi split. That's the end of the marriage after 20 years, but they remained friends. And more importantly, business partners. She files for divorce, charging Desi with extreme cruelty, subjecting her to grievous mental suffering. I've tried so hard to be fair and solve our problems, but I find it impossible to go on. In 1961, Desi calls Lucy, looks at the bottom line of Desilu and says, Lucy, we're in trouble. We need to do something. You need to go back to work. Lucy said, okay, I'll go back to work. She does. Desilu was on the ropes. The Ann Sothern Show, Angel and Guesswood Ho were canceled. The Untouchables, they were still on. Those wobbly because so many people objecting to the show and the content of the show. Desi calls Lucy, call CBS. We got to pump some money into Desilu. Network wasn't interested initially in Lucy. And she says, hey, I'm Lucy. How much money do I make for you? Okay. And I got some conditions. Now what? Well, Vivian Vance, Ethel, not going to be Ethel anymore. She needs to be the co-star. Oh, in that Monday night time slot that we used to be on, I want it back. CBS caves in. Here's another first. Lucy. Vivian Vance's character was the first divorced woman on primetime television. And there's Vivian Vance. In 1962, shortly after the debut of the Lucy Show, Desi says, Lucy, buy me out. Buy me out. $2.5 million and 300,350 shares of stock later. Lucy is the most powerful woman officially in Hollywood, but she had been the most powerful woman in Hollywood before that. And she's now running Desilu. This is November 1962. Arnaz resigns as president. His holdings are bought out. She's the president of the company. She is the boss. She is the absolute boss. And she's going to run it with an iron fist, as the board of directors found out. Before The Feminine Mystique came out in 1963, the book by Bella Abzug, before Gloria Steinem going undercover to become a Playboy bunny and report on what it was really like to be a Playboy bunny, before Bella Abzug, before any of these people. Lucy shatters the glass ceiling, and there's nothing on record that suggests she was a women's liberationist. Friedan and Steinem and the others would form the National Organization of Women in 1966, more than 3 years after Lucy does what she does. One of her first decisions, all aces with me, Fractured Fairy Tales as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old. I loved it. They pulled, Desilu, pulled segments out of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, featuring characters like Snidely Whiplash, who I liked, against Dudley Do-Right, who I didn't like, no feminine, Peabody and Sherman, and they packaged it and syndicated it. And I watched it. She founded Desilu Sales, and that's the syndication company they didn't have. And J. Ward Productions, Fractured Flickers in 1964 was the first product. She would keep everybody around for the most part. She took their advice for the most part. She relied on them except for one idea. Oh, this was her idea. Let's do the Lucy show in color. Why? Because when the Lucy show is at the end of its run, which inevitably it was going to be, we could package it in syndication and get more money because it was in color. CBS did not air color shows until September 1965, even though CBS invented color TV back in 1940. Peter Carl Goldmark did that. CBS, one of its last black and white shows was Ed Sullivan in 1965, featuring the Beatles. Desilu gets a number of proposals to do shows. One of them, Mission Impossible. Yeah, cool, good. It's a great show. Mannix, cool, good, great show. Star Trek. No. We can't do it. We can't do it, says the board of directors, talking to Lucy, where no man has ever gone before, where no woman has ever gone before. Lucille Ball had a couple proposals in 64, 65 for shows. One was Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, and the other was Mission Impossible. The board of directors knew that Star Trek was going to be expensive to shoot for a test show. Lucy thought the show was about USO performers going from military base to military base. She didn't realize it was about space, but she liked it. And she decided to put money up for this show, titled The Cage. NBC looked at it, said, no good, no can do. But that guy with the pointy ears, the half human, half Martian, once you go back, develop a show around him. We think that might be interesting. The board of directors say they want a second show to look at. We can't do it. We're going to bankrupt the company. Lucy says, who's in charge here, you or me? Gene Roddenberry tells Lucy and friends, it's Wagon Train to the Stars. Network TV is uninterested in the concept. Besides, ABC has Wagon Train, or had Wagon Train on. Desilu's board, too expensive. Lucy, I'm not interested in what you're interested in. We're going to do it. And they recast it. Leonard Nimoy, who would not be the star. William Shatner would be the star. The pilot, The Cage, flopped. The second pilot, where no man has ever gone before, retained Leonard Nimoy's Mr. Spock character from the first pilot. Lucy agreed to finance the reshoot over the preferences of her board of directors. The rest is history. Star Trek's worth billions of dollars now. Engulf and Devour, Gulf and Western. They buy out Lucy for $17.5 million. She turned the studio around, which was not making money, to a money maker, and she cashes out. Paramount, Engulf and Western, Gulf and Western, we used to call them Engulf and Western, also buys out Paramount Television. Paramount Pictures becomes Paramount Television, which now owns CBS. Today it's called CBS Television Studios, and they have a piece of Jeopardy. Ball established her own production company, the Lucille Ball Productions, in 1968. Came up with a new series. Here's Lucy that year. That program would run until it ran its course in 1974. Had a number of years of rating success. Here's Lucy. She tries the movies again. Guess what? She's told the same thing. you have no talent. And apparently movie audiences thought the same thing, because she was in a number of bombs. She would teach an 8-week class on comedies at Cal State Northridge, north of LA, in 1977. She has one more hit in her. Tom Cruise, All the Right Moves. And she is the producer of this film, along with her second husband, Gary Morton, Philip Goldfarb, and Stephen Deutsch. Tom Cruise stars in it. He's a young guy, high school football player, looking for a scholarship to attend college. He does not want to be like his father and brother who worked in the steel mills. Movie, very successful. Her last appearance at the Oscars in 1989. She would die a few weeks afterwards. And that should be the end of the story, but it's not. I Love Lucy, and so does CBS. Lucy is still making money for CBS. Lucy is a pioneer for women. She paved the way for women to be taken seriously in big, big business in the 1950s and 1960s. She was the artistic head of Desilu. I Love Lucy's been on the shelf now for more than 64 years. 64 years on the shelf. However, in the last year that we could find, or anybody could find, that CBS talked about I Love Lucy in terms of making money, 2012, the CBS president, Les Movies, said the show was making the company $20 million annually, and it's still a cash cow, shown all over the world. I think it's on Hallmark Channel here in the United States. It ain't over until it's over, as my old friend Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra said. I used to speak at his museum over in Montclair, New Jersey, a couple of times a year. Yogi would always come to my talks, pat me on the back, say, "Good job, kid, let's eat." And we'd eat. And he'd tell me things like, "Hey, if you ain't trying, if you ain't cheating," things like that. But and I treasure my moments with Yogi over those years. And the last time I saw him was in 2011. He fell and was never the same after that fall in 2011. But it ain't over until it's over. Aaron Sorkin, Nicole Kidman, Javier Bardem. There's going to be a movie on Netflix, and it's going to be called Being the Ricardos. And it takes place during the course of a week during the production of I Love Lucy, which sees Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz encounter yet another crisis that could jeopardize their careers and marriage. Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem are the stars. The biopic is being written and directed by Ann Sothern. So I want to thank Nola for inviting me, and if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free.
I actually had a question. I was wondering, when I Love Lucy was originally broadcast, were there any states or areas in the country that refused to broadcast it because of the interracial aspect of the marriage?
No, first of all, TV was limited to LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Detroit. I mean, it wasn't all over the place. TV wouldn't accelerate until 1953, 54. Interracial marriage was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1967 in the Loving versus Virginia case. Richard Loving and his wife, Mildred Jeter. Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter were an interracial couple, married in Washington, moved back to Virginia, promptly arrested in Virginia, and decided to sue. And it went up to the Supreme Court in 1967, and 6-3 decision, interracial marriage was illegal. By the way, the Hays Code, doing research on the Hays Code, forbid interracial relationships in movies from 1934 on. And gradually that was eroded by the 1960s. So that was a big consideration, a huge consideration in the I Love Lucy show. But they went on tour. Nobody seemed to notice. Anybody else? Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up. And I want to thank people in advance for watching this when it's rebroadcast. Remember, they invented the rerun. So your library, the West Hampton Library, is going to have the rerun. of this talk. So I want to thank Nola and everybody over at the library. Stay safe, and thank everybody who attended today and people who will watch it. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope you enjoyed it. And Lucy, during her time, 1950, 52, 53. That was some tumultuous times for her, but she was a survivor. She survived, and so did Eddie Albert and Leonard Bernstein and a lot of others. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your very informative program.
We'll see you down the line. Have a good weekend, and enjoy the nice weather out there, because summer is coming back soon. Although in the Hamptons, you get the breeze, so that doesn't really matter. But anyway, enjoy the day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.